Hello, I'm Angus Cress Gillespie, your host for Old Ways in New Jersey. Today we have a distinguished guest, Sanj Altan. In real life, he's a biostatistician with Johnson & Johnson, but in his spare time, he's the president of the Mongol-American Cultural Association, and he's here to tell us a little bit about the work of that group. Welcome.
Thank you, Angus. Glad to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about the accomplishments of the Mongol-American Cultural Association?
Sure. Let me just give you a little bit of background first.
Sure, please.
The Mongol-American Cultural Association is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization. It was founded in 1991, but the start of the organization actually was probably around 1988 when a small group of us started meeting and talking about cultural issues.
Well, that's understandable because you first get started and get the ball rolling, and only later do you get official status.
So originally the impetus for establishing the organization formally was to promote some of our humanitarian charitable projects, as well as to continue our annual Chinggis Khan Memorial Ceremony. So on the humanitarian charitable side, we have mounted a number of initiatives in support of, for example, in the early 90s into the late 90s, we supported street children in Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia. At that time, the economy was quite bad, and there were hundreds of street children who had no access to medical care.
And I assume that many of them were children of nomads who had gravitated to the city.
That's right, yes, yes. So the economic conditions sort of promoted that kind of situation.
It's a global problem, which is...
I think it is, but in Mongolia it was particularly acute. So that's an example of one of the humanitarian. We also support some scholarships and educational programs, cultural programs in Mongolia. And on the cultural side, we have, of course, the annual Chinggis Khan Memorial Ceremony. We also support cultural activities of various kinds, visiting scholars, individuals who are coming and giving talks and activities like this. So our main goal really is promotion of Mongolian culture, the preservation of Mongolian culture in the United States for the general public. Not just to the Mongolian community, but to the public.
I understand that the 2015 Mongolian Memorial Celebration will be taking place in the Princeton area on November 7th?
That's right, Saturday, November 7th.
Can you tell us a little bit about what we can expect at that program? And is it open to the public?
Yes, it is, but they need to call in or go to the website and register. But
okay, we'll put the website up on the screen.
Okay. But that is really a day in which we remember Chinggis Khan and the life and accomplishments of, well, I guess the American or standard pronunciation is Genghis Khan, but the Mongolian pronunciation is Chinggis Khan. But so let's use the American pronunciation for the purposes of this discussion. But Genghis Khan was the founder of the Mongolian nation, and a memorial was actually established to him somewhere toward the latter part of the 13th century, and that memorial has continued uninterrupted since the time that it was first established in the Ordus region of what is currently today southern Mongolia, which lies within the borders of China. And in this Ordus region, a special group of people called the Darkhid were more or less created out of members, out of representatives of all of the Mongolian tribes of that time to come and preserve the artifacts and the objects of that time in order to pay homage to Chinggis. So this was done, it evolved, as you can imagine, over many centuries. And the original ceremonies are really the basis for what we do. My teacher, Professor Gombajab Hangin, went back and visited this region and participated in one of the ceremonies in the 80s. And he brought back with him a number of materials that captured the essence of their ceremony, and that's been the basis of what we do. So we have a formal memorial ceremony to Genghis Khan, and our goal really is to perpetuate his memory. That's our main goal here.
Well, take us back. Tell us a little bit about Genghis Khan's childhood and how he became the great Khan.
Sure. So Genghis Khan was born in the late 12th century, around 1162, and at that time the northern region, this is the region beyond the Great Wall of China. Now you know that the Great Wall was built essentially to be a kind of a separation between the civilization of China, the civilized people, and the northern nomadic peoples, the barbarians. And so Genghis was born at that time when there were many tribes vying with each other. So it was a period of complete warfare. It was always one tribe battling with another tribe, trying to gain some supremacy. And this was really something that was in the interest of the Chinese civilization, because as long as the nomads were sort of quarreling amongst themselves, they would leave China alone. But you see, the genius of Genghis Khan was that he saw the nomadic, the tribal dynamic for what it was, and he wanted to do something about it.
And he saw communalities among these tribes.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they shared a common culture. Yeah. So there were many tribes, but they shared a common culture.
It's almost as if he said, why can't we all get along?
Exactly. That's very much like what. But his childhood was difficult. I mean, being a nomadic child of that period, it was a very hard struggle. His father was killed by enemies when he was quite young. As a result, his father was actually the chieftain of that tribe. And when his father passed away, they were left more or less without any kind of support. And he was a young boy at that time. And he spent his childhood essentially just trying to survive. But he had a spark of genius, and he was able to, despite the fact that most of the tribe's people had abandoned the family now, since his father had died, he was able to surround himself with some trusted allies, and eventually established a core group of people as followers. And from those beginnings, he sort of engaged with other tribespeople and tribes to start consolidating power. And it was one series of alliances and victories that led to eventually his ascension to the great military leader that he was.
So he was a politician first before he became a military leader, you might say.
I think to do what Genghis Khan did, you definitely have to have political skills. Yes.
Yeah.
He knew how to inspire people. He knew how to draw people to him. He had leadership qualities. I mean, I say this all the time. It must have been incredibly difficult to be the son of Genghis Khan. To have a father like that, how could you ever meet that standard? Yeah. And that's a standard that will never be met again in history. His achievements and his leadership. He was
a charismatic figure.
Very much so. Yeah. Yes, definitely charismatic. And I mean, just in terms of the charisma, I would say that one of the principles that he followed that really drew people to him was that he assessed people on their merits. He didn't evaluate people in relation to, well, you're my cousin, or you're my friend, or you're my brother's son. It was always, you know,
what can you do?
What can you do, and what are the skills that you have, and let me appreciate it, and let me evaluate it according to your merits. So he was very objective that way. That was one of the things that people really admired.
No nepotism.
Nepotism was Not really what he was about, no. So in that sense, he was not really your typical politician.
No. Now, moving along, how do you account for his spectacular military success?
Well, this is a very interesting question. We could spend a whole, hour on this, but I'm going to try and summarize it in a few sentences. But he was a military genius. He also surrounded himself with people who had innate leadership as well, and he organized his military forces in what he called the system of tens. So there would be 10 soldiers reporting into a captain. There would be 10 captains reporting into a major. There would be 10 majors reporting into a general. There would be 10 generals reporting into an overall commander. And he had 4 corps commanders. So this system of 10 is what allowed him to have very clear communication across his soldiers.
It was a pyramidal hierarchy.
Yes, very much so. And so he had that military structure in place. So that was one thing. The other thing is he had all of the modern technology of that time. So the kinds of weapons that they used really represented the best in terms of sword making, spear making, and so on. In addition, Chinggis was a genius in terms of military strategy. His military battle plans are still studied today at West Point and other military academies. They still look at the strategies that Chinggis Khan's soldiers, his army actually carried out. One of his famous tactics is called the Tulugma. So the Tulugma strategy was one in which they would engage the enemy with a very light force, head on. Meanwhile, there would be a right wing and a left wing. So there's military terms for the way that his army was organized. So these right wing and left wing forces would be on both sides. The central force would engage the enemy and then pull back. They would draw back and bring the enemy with them. Meanwhile, the right and the left would come around from the back and attack from both sides. So this was a famous strategy that he used successfully many times.
Like a feint, you might say.
Very much so,
Yeah.
yes, very much so, yeah. So he had
to draw them into the jaws of this
That's
pincher.
right, yes, exactly. And in many cases, far fewer forces. Chinggis was able to defeat much larger forces with his fewer forces because of his strategies.
That's a very concise explanation. Thank you. Yeah. Moving along, what are some of the major cultural contributions that Mongolians have given the rest of us and the rest of the world?
I think, the most famous one, I think, is the Pony Express. So when the Mongolian Empire was finally in its peak, so going from the Pacific Ocean all the way to the borders of Europe, they had a very efficient postal system. So people in the heartland of where the Mongolian rulers were constantly getting reports from all parts of the empire because of this postal system. So the postal system was one in which there would be relay stations built every 15 or 20 miles, I guess it is. And they would have fresh horses. So from the far reaches of the empire, every 10 or 15 miles, there would be a courier going, getting fresh horses, riding to the next post, and so on, all the way into Central Asia. This was a very efficient system of communications, and it preceded what we call the Pony Express in the United States in the 19th century.
That's amazing. I had no idea.
Yeah.
It's an efficient way to knit the empire together.
Very much so, yeah, yeah.
Other cultural examples.
Well, let me also touch on a political example, too. You know, prior to the Mongolian conquest of China, China was basically a split nation. It was basically 3 different, maybe more, areas which were, vying with each other. It was really the Mongolian dynasty that brought this together and established an administrative system that still exists more or less today. So China, in terms of being a single country today, can really, in some ways, go back to the Mongolian Empire and thank the Mongolian rulers for having done that. Also, the Silk Road is a good example.
Oh, yeah.
The Silk Road opened up communications between the East and the West, so all sorts of trade was initiated as a result of that. I think the stories of Marco Polo, for example. Are you familiar with? Have you read anything?
Yes.
So he talks about some of the things that he saw in the court of Kublai Khan. And it appears that some of those concepts and ideas he brought back to Italy with him. Yeah.
If I recall correctly, it was just about 3 or 4 years ago that the American Museum of Natural History had a special exhibit on the Silk Road.
Yes, yes.
And they pointed out that the goods were shipped from the east to the west and vice versa.
That's right, yeah. So, you know, the tea trade, for example, and the introduction of tea is thought to be, to have been influenced quite a bit by that trade, you know, silk and the exchange of other goods, certainly. Yeah.
So I don't want to push you too hard. Other cultural examples?
Other cultural examples, well, let's back up for a minute. I mean, the culture of Mongolia traditionally is based on a nomadic economy.
Yes.
So the nomadic economy, what does that mean? Nomads are people who don't have a sedentary life in a single place. It's not like you can write down an address and say, you know, mail a letter to them. They move from place to...
That's why they have these yurts.
That's right,
and,
yeah.
and they're herders.
Yes, and they're herders. So they move with the seasons. So the Mongolian culture really is defined by this sense of moving with the seasons. So you have your summer pastures, then you have your winter pastures, and in between you have a spring and fall. So this kind of nomadic culture, well, in the case of the Mongolians, they're the only nomadic culture who developed their own system of writing. So even though they were nomads, they had a kind of a bureaucracy as well that was able to develop a system of writing, and the system of writing actually came shortly after the time of Genghis Khan, and it was based on Middle Eastern scripts that were brought into Central Asia with the Nestorian Christians who were trying to propagate Christianity in Central Asia. So they developed, the Uyghurs were the first to get that, and then the Mongolians borrowed Uygurian writing and developed Mongolian script. And so, in a sense...
It may have originated in Mesopotamia and then spread.
Sogdian, actually. Yeah. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but Sogdian is really the root script that eventually became Mongolian. So that form of writing, the literature that the Mongolians have developed is very interesting and is a contribution to the world as well. For instance, The Secret History of the Mongols is a very important document that was originally orally transmitted, but in the probably 13th century, 14th century, we're not exactly sure when, it was written down. The original was lost, but it was preserved in Chinese characters and now reconstructed, and that has been a very important document for world literature.
Moving along, how did Mongol culture differ from the places that they conquered?
Well, as I was mentioning before, I mean, the culture is really based on this nomadic economy. And so as a nomadic people, they were very much dependent on their livestock. And the livestock that we're talking about are cattle, sheep, camels, horses in particular. In some areas, they also, some Mongolians also herd reindeer.
Yes.
But the four main ones are the ones that I just mentioned. So everything was really derived from their animal products. I mean, they had like 30 or 40 different kinds of cheese that they would make from all of the different milk that was produced by the different animals. All of their the skin and so on was used for clothing, for all sorts of art objects and so on. And the fur, rather the felt, came from the wool of their sheep. So the yurts that you're talking about were made of felt that was gathered from their sheep herds. So this kind of a culture is very unique, and we might actually call it a nomadic civilization. It is a kind of civilization that has its own unique characters, and it's something that we ought to be trying to preserve today.
It's more based on animal husbandry than on agriculture.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
It's not agricultural at all. I mean, that would not be something that the Mongols would. You have to be sedentary to dig up the ground.
Plus, the terrain didn't lend itself to that.
And also, it was an environmental consideration too. I mean, the Mongolians, nomads, lived in harmony with the environment for thousands of years.
Yeah.
It was never. They never thought in terms of in any way damaging the land. Today we have great desertification and so on. Most of that is because of farming and agriculture. So the nomadic lifestyle knows how to live in harmony with nature.
It was ecological.
Very much so, exactly, yes, ecological.
Moving along, how did the reign of Kublai Khan in the Eastern Empire differ from that of his grandfather?
Oh, in many ways. Genghis Khan passed away in around 1225, and Kublai Khan at that time was a small boy. So he did see his grandfather. He knew, of course, directly experiencing his grandfather, but he grew up in a later generation, you might say. And at that time, the conquest of China was being consolidated, and it was when Kublai Khan actually was an adult, and he led the final forces that basically conquered all of China. He ascended then to the throne, you might say. That formed the Yuan dynasty. So in many ways, you could say that Kublai was an emperor of China, even though he was a Mongolian. He was the first emperor of the Yuan dynasty in China. So in that sense, he was very different. And his grandfather would have said, don't ever stop being a nomad. But Kublai Khan wanted to become an emperor, you see. So he moved the capital from the Mongolian center to what is today Beijing. And he became more or less an emperor in the traditional style of previous dynasties. So in that sense, he was very different from his grandfather. And I would say that had he stayed in the Mongolian heartland, history might be quite different today. Yeah, but no.
And even today, correct me if I'm wrong, the Chinese are very suspicious of the Mongols.
I don't know if suspicion is the right term, but culturally we're quite different.
Yeah.
And we have our culture, we have our own language, we have our own history, we have our own system of writing and so on, and as do the Chinese. So I think we can't deny that over the centuries that there have been many conflicts, but there's been also very close historical connections. So, in that sense, it is a you might say there is a shared history.
Is it fair to say that it's peaceful along the border at the present time?
Yes, I would say that's a fair characterization.
And something that's bothered me, I think the term Mongol is kind of an omnibus term. It embraces many different ethnicities. Can you give us a little breakdown of what the component parts are?
Sure. Well, we were talking before about the Mongolian region in China. So there is probably 3.5 to 4 million Mongolian people in the country of China. And in the country of Mongolia today, there's probably 2.5 million. So there are actually more Mongolians living outside of the country of Mongolia than within the country. But so we might say, in broad terms, we have the country of Mongolia, we have Mongolian groups in China, and then we have Mongolian communities in Russia. So we have the Kalmyk Mongols, we have the Buryat Mongols, we have the Tuvan Mongols, and more recently what's come to people's attention too is the Hazara Mongols. Now the Hazara Mongols are descendants of armies of the Mongolian armies that invaded the Middle East in the 12th century and 13th century. The descendants of these armies have preserved their own culture and their own physical characteristics, their own traditions. And if you look at them, many of them look just like me. I mean, they look very Mongolian. What's happened is, up until the turn of the century, they spoke a Mongolian language.
Wow.
But over the past century, they've kind of lost that, and now they speak a language that's called Hazaragi. So the Hazara Mongols are actually the largest Mongolian group in the world. There's 9 to 10 million of them in Afghanistan, and another 1 million or 2 in Iraq and Iran and Pakistan. So they're the center of gravity of the Mongolian world. If you think about it in terms of sheer numbers, it's there in the Hazara heartland. And they're making now strong connections with other Mongolian groups. So, you know, they come and participate in the annual Genghis Khan ceremony. So these are some of the Mongolian groups.
That's very interesting. I had no idea about the presence in the Middle East. That's fascinating. Can you tell us a little bit more about what we might expect at the Genghis Khan Memorial Ceremony in Princeton area coming up?
Sure. Okay, so I did mention before that we're going to have the formal ceremony, the memorial ceremony. So this is a memorial ceremony. It's solemn, and we basically invoke the spirit of Genghis Khan, and it's very much a sort of a remembrance and a blessing. After the formal ceremony itself, then we open it up to a number of different kind of topics. This year, I think we're going to have a little discussion on a movie that was recently produced by Saz Carey on Mongolian shamanism. She's going to present a little bit on that. We're going to have Mongolian dance and song performances, music performances, and we'll have a number of speeches and a keynote address by a scholar. We'll have a reception afterwards, and we'll end the day with probably a few more cultural performances.
Sanj, I want to thank you for coming to East Brunswick this morning and sharing your culture with us. It's been a fascinating ride. Thank you so much.
Glad to be here.